Yes, this is real, and would have added a lot for the characters if the Avatar live action had not completely removed it from the entire story. This was Avatar: The Last Airbender's firebending episode, and what's ironic is that most of the new parts of this story made for the new show all have to do with the Fire Nation, but a lot don't really add much, if not anything, to the main story apart from the Zuko stuff. But this story has so much meaning to every character involved and for the future of the series. We would have seen Aang, Sokka, and Katara able to actually enter the Fire Nation. Because of a cultural festival, they'd be able to do this in disguises so that Aang could perhaps have the slimmest possibility of finding a firebending teacher. And guess what? He actually did. Not only at this point in the story has Aang already begun to practice other elements besides air, like water, which Aang never actually does in the live action, even though this is adapting book 1, water. Anyway, he also begins to practice firebending. Yeah, you heard me right. Aang in season 1 of the cartoon actually bended 3 out of the 4 freaking elements. Obviously, in book 2, earthbending was the hardest for him to do, but alright, if you're a hardcore fan, you know this is the story of the deserter of book 1. But bro, when time passes, you forget things like how much of a certain something this one story has. And get ready for that certain something we all wanted and never got in the new live action. And that's something called character development. And who's to blame for all of this character development? Freaking John. Yet I sat and watched the entire live action, and this man was nowhere to be seen. Azula, who originally just had cameos in season 1, now has new scenes that together are longer than this entire episode. Yet you're saying John is the one we didn't have time for? What? Do you not know how he furthers this story? This is the man who exposed Aang's flaws as a master immediately. There's a reason why the Avatar has more than one master beyond it being because it's 4 different elements. They also all have to teach him different aspects of mentality. Gyatso is kind of a goofball and was all about Aang's freedom as a kid, and Aang learned to enjoy himself and be happy. But for fire, Aang has to have a different way of thinking. John says Aang must master discipline, but Aang isn't interested in that, therefore he has no interest in Aang. Aang should be taking life seriously, but he copes with life by being unserious and therefore being undisciplined. But wait, in the live action, that isn't who Aang is. Aang is serious all the time, so I guess this just doesn't make any sense. And here comes a giant middle finger from the live action writers. Roku's second of his 3 appearances in book 1 happens right here, and it's freaking awesome. Roku steps in for Aang and delivers such a tough line that he out-serioused the serious character, so John just straight up submits to being Aang's master.
You are not ready! You are too weak!
You think I am weak?
Avatar Roku. No, I did not mean that.
Roku, the serious firebending avatar, is now a non-serious jokester in the live action and only appears once for some reason, even though he's literally the most important avatar besides Aang in this entire show. Right, the live action writers totally understood this character. Now, if you really are gonna hop on those comments and say it's a good thing that John isn't in the live action, then are you like even a fan of this show, or do you just love drinking the Netflix writers' refrigerated breast milk no matter how it tastes? John is one of the most powerful firebenders in the world. He was once in a role like Iroh as a general in the Fire Nation, is in the White Lotus, and teams up with another White Lotus member, Pakku, who happens to be Aang's 3rd bending master after Gyatso and John. Oh wait, Neither John or Pakku are Aang's masters in the live action, because Katara is her own master and is therefore good enough to be Aang's master right away, I guess sometime off screen between seasons. Yeah, that's a much better story, I guess. And no, this isn't an isolated, self-contained episode that has no ties to the rest of the story. You don't have that excuse to cut this episode. Book 1 has 2 villains, Zuko and Zhao. And Aang has stories with both of them. And in this episode, Zhao is meant to be a broken reflection of a future Aang, and this is why Jean did not want to train him. Jean was literally Zhao's master, but Zhao had the flaws that Aang has. He has strong, raw power, but was impatient, undisciplined, and only cared about using fire to get stronger. And Jean tells Zhao that Aang has much more raw power than he does, and that he'd easily lose in a fight to Aang. Aang ignores everything he's told about restraint and discipline and does exactly what Zhao does by only focusing on the power of making fire. And Aang does this easily. So easy that Katara almost ended up becoming Freddy Krueger because Aang fries this girl up in flames, and Sokka is like, oh, nah, and tackles this kid to the ground, ready to take on the Avatar as a non-bender. Then John is like, yeah, nah, everyone get out of here, I'm not doing this, go on, get. But before everyone leaves, what have we here? Katara has a one-to-one with John. He explains she has been gifted with the ability to heal, and that some, that's right, some, not all female waterbenders have this ability. And boy, this is very important to know about Katara. Remember when this point was made in the live action? No? What do you mean, no? Meanwhile, Aang, who would have thought, actually has a fight with the second main villain of Book 1, and this episode, of course, comes right after the show had him fight Zuko as the main villain in the previous episode, which they also didn't show in the live action, and man, it was a pretty nice fight. And yes, I know he had a kind of a fight in the live action, but Aang was really just running away from Zuko, while here he's legit fighting Zuko. Aang realizes that Zhao is a mirror of him as John's student because Zhao says he learned what he wanted out of him and left because the rest was boring. This is pretty much what Aang was all about in this episode. And this fight gives us something the live action severely, to an extreme degree, lacked. Humor. Aang doesn't throw a single blow. Instead of using bending, he uses humor to win the fight. You might think that sounds stupid, but no, it's used to show Aang outsmarting an admiral who is all about raw power and can be beat by words. Do you see the layers to Aang's character? Unlike the live action, where the only 2 characteristics Aang had in the script was saying he's a failure and then smiling in 3 scenes to pander to us fans about how Aang is a fun character. Aang is actually burned in this fight, but here is a giant piece of foreshadowing. Katara uses her special ability to heal Aang's damaged body from one of the main villain's attacks. If it isn't established that she could do this, then I guess Aang is dying at the end of season 2 of the live action from Azula's lightning blast, and Katara will take on the title of self-taught Avatar. Be honest, that doesn't sound too far-fetched with how they wrote her character in the live action so far. I mean, in the live action, they did randomly give her some spirit water at the end of this, even though, unlike the cartoon, she was never even shown to have healing as an ability and didn't even accept to be trained in that ability. Cartoon Katara literally voluntarily went to learn this in the Northern Water Tribe, even if she wasn't allowed to fight. And of course, Aang, instead of ending up like Zhao, has now changed to fit his new master's way of thinking, and just like John, says he has given up on firebending forever. Yes, we know both of them end up firebending again in season 3 to end the war, but that's the beauty of character development. Characters actually experience change. But go ahead and comment, I actually enjoyed this change, because what's the point of a one-to-one copy of the cartoon? Because that's a great argument right there. That's a perfect argument everybody has. But there are some things the live action did very well. Check out my very honest review right here.